When they opened the king's coffin, they expected royal bones. They found someone else. Royal tombs are not supposed to hold surprises. They are sealed by ceremony, recorded by scribes, protected by the church, sealed and sanctified, meant to remain undisturbed until Judgment Day. The names on the tombs are supposed to match the bones inside. For centuries, nobody checked. When antiquarians did open tombs, they cataloged objects, not biology. The bones were assumed to match the name. Then DNA arrived, and the mismatches started piling up. Across Europe, geneticists have begun opening the coffins of kings and queens. The results are devastating. Wrong bodies in the right tombs. Right bodies in the wrong tombs. Children where adults should be. Adults where children were recorded. Every mismatch is a cover-up, a mistake, or a mystery. DNA cannot tell you which. The bones do not lie, but the inscriptions sometimes do. The most dramatic case began in France, in the crypt of a royal basilica where kings had been buried for 1,000 years. When researchers opened the coffin of a medieval French king, the remains did not match. The bones were too small, too young. This was not a grown man. This was a child of perhaps 5 or 6 years. The coffin said king. The skeleton said otherwise. Someone had made a terrible mistake or a deliberate switch. The growth plates were unfused. The teeth showed a child under 7. The king, whose name was on the coffin, had ruled for decades and died in his 50s. These bones belonged to someone else entirely. So who was this child? And what happened to the king's actual remains? The team extracted DNA. The results added a new layer to the mystery. The child was female, not only the wrong age, the wrong sex. The stone promised a monarch. The science revealed someone entirely unexpected. The inscription wasn't just a mistake, it was completely wrong. The inscription was carved with absolute certainty. The DNA dismantled it. A girl in a king's coffin. The inscription was not just wrong, it was completely wrong. The inscription was carved with absolute certainty. The DNA dismantled it. The case was not isolated. The Basilica of Saint Denis near Paris has served as the royal necropolis of France for over 1,000 years. Dozens of French monarchs were buried here from the 7th century onward. Their tombs were supposed to be permanent monuments. The revolution had other plans. But during the French Revolution in 1793, the tombs were opened. The royal remains were exhumed, stripped of valuables, and thrown into mass graves. The revolutionaries mixed the bones of 50 kings and queens into a single pit. Identity dissolved overnight. Quicklime was poured over the bones. The intent was to erase them entirely. The revolutionaries mixed the bones of 50 kings and queens into a single pit. Identity dissolved overnight. Quicklime was poured over the bones. The intent was to erase them entirely. When the monarchy was restored, the bones were returned. But which bones belonged to which king, nobody knew. The reassignment was based on guesswork, coffin fragments, historical descriptions, educated assumptions. They put the bones back. They had no way to know if they got it right. In the 2010s, genetic analysis of remains attributed to specific French monarchs began revealing systematic misidentification. Remains attributed to one king carried the mitochondrial DNA of a completely different lineage. The bones had been shuffled. The 19th century restorers had guessed, and they had guessed wrong. The mismatches were not subtle. Entire lineages were swapped. Physical anthropology had raised suspicions for years. DNA confirmed them. The royal tombs of France contain the wrong kings. An entire royal necropolis, and the DNA says almost none of the labels are correct. But the most haunting case of bones in the wrong place involves 2 children who disappeared from a tower in 1483. Edward V and Richard of Shrewsbury. The princes in the tower, aged 12 and 9, heirs to the English throne, placed under the protection of their uncle. Then silence. They were placed in the tower by their uncle, Richard III. They were never seen again. They were placed in the tower by their uncle, Richard III. They were never seen again. In 1674, workmen demolishing a staircase found a wooden chest. Inside were the skeletons of 2 children. Charles II ordered the bones placed in an urn at Westminster Abbey. The missing princes, he declared. In 1933, the urn was opened for the first and only modern examination. The bones were examined by physical anthropologists who estimated 2 children aged roughly 12 and 10. The ages roughly matched. But roughly is not proof, and the church has refused DNA testing ever since. Multiple research teams have petitioned to test the bones. Every petition has been denied. The Abbey says the dead should rest, but resting under the wrong name is not resting. It is a 500-year-old error. The technology exists. Living relatives with known Plantagenet DNA exist. Richard III's own DNA was sequenced in 2014. We have their uncle's DNA. We have the bones. And nobody will let them be compared. Richard III carried haplogroup J. If the Westminster bones match, the case is closed. If they do not match, then the bones in Westminster Abbey belong to someone else. Either way, DNA would answer a 500-year-old murder mystery. The church says no. The Richard III discovery proved what DNA can do when authorities allow testing. Found under a car park in Leicester. Identified through DNA matched to a living descendant. 17 generations. 500 years. And the mitochondrial DNA still matched. 17 generations of unbroken maternal inheritance. If they could identify a king under a parking lot, they could identify 2 princes, if allowed. The comparison would take days. The extraction would take hours. The answer would resolve centuries of debate. Mitochondrial DNA passes through the maternal line. Richard and the princes shared the same maternal grandmother. If the bones are the princes, the DNA will match. What does it mean when royal remains cannot be trusted? Every royal tomb in Europe was assembled by human hands. Hands that could make mistakes. Hands that could deceive. DNA does not care about inscriptions. It reads the bones, not the labels. DNA does not care about inscriptions. It reads the bones, not the labels. The vast majority of European royal burials have never been DNA tested. The mismatches found so far may be the tip of a much larger problem. Every coffin is a sealed question. Every inscription is a hypothesis. DNA is the only proof, and most coffins have never been tested. The calls for systematic testing are growing, but the institutions that guard the tombs are not always willing. Churches protect the dead. Scientists want to read them. The conflict is not going away. The ethical debate is real. The dead were buried with the expectation of permanence. Testing disturbs that compact, but the counter-argument is equally powerful. If the bones are misidentified, the tomb is already wrong. Testing corrects the error. The dead cannot consent. But they also cannot correct their own labels. Only DNA can do that. If you found value in this investigation, subscribing helps this channel keep asking the questions that royal history left unanswered. Sources and further reading are linked in the description below. 2 children in an urn, a 500-year-old question, and the technology to answer it waiting on the shelf.